Thank you. I thank my colleague from Phoenix, Ms. Sinema. And while San Diego's VA centers have performed better than most and the backlog of benefits claims has been reduced significantly in my region, we can't ignore the larger structural reforms that the entire VA system clearly needs. In San Diego, my district office staff has been working to help veterans and their families who have experienced the bureaucratic red tape at the VA firsthand. Since coming to Congress last year, we've handled more than 400 veterans' cases and have recovered more than $750,000 in benefits to which these veterans were entitled. I've also focused on ways to make the transition from active duty service back to civilian life an easier one for our veterans and their families. Last year, I engaged with military commanders, nonprofits, and veterans advocates to launch the Military Transition Support Project. This collaborative community effort will provide a central hub of information for service members as they become veterans and search for housing, employment, and benefits. It's on its way to being a national model and doesn't cost the federal government or taxpayers a dime. The experience of Dr. Howard and Jean Somers, constituents of mine from Coronado, has only added to my urgency in addressing and reform at the VA. The Somers' son, Daniel, served our country in Operation Iraqi Freedom. As the Somers testified in the House Veterans Affairs Committee 2 weeks ago, their son made several attempts after returning home from combat to seek help and counseling for post-traumatic stress, but was unsuccessful ultimately, and eventually he took his own life. The VA system failed Daniel Somers, it failed his parents, and it's unacceptable. Both the Senate and the House have taken action to make real substantive changes at the VA, and I voted for many of these measures in the House, but the Senate's plan is comprehensive, bipartisan, and is the best opportunity for the quick action that our veterans deserve. It will benefit thousands of veterans by increasing their access to care, by allowing the VA to lease more facilities, hire doctors and nurses to fill their most pressing staff shortages, and by allowing veterans to see non-VA providers if they've been forced to wait for an appointment or live too far from the closest facility. It would increase accountability on those responsible for the recent failures by allowing the VA secretary to fire complacent employees, and through changes to the scheduling, staffing, and administrative processes at each facility. Part of my motion also has to do with ensuring that our veterans and their spouses are able to access a high-quality education after their time of active duty has ended. Veterans are advancing themselves at colleges and universities across my district and across San Diego and across the country. Expanding in-state tuition to our vets, regardless of where they live, would expand their educational opportunities significantly and potentially reduce the financial burden that many of them face. As of today, only 24 states offer in-state tuition benefits for vets who have not yet met the standard residency requirements of that state. My home state of California is one of those that does not offer it. In the University of California system, one of the premier public university systems in the entire world, more than 1,600 vets are currently enrolled. The in-state tuition at a UC school averages $13,200 per year. For non-residents, $36,000, a difference of $23,000 that the vet must pay out of pocket. UC San Diego, part of which is in my district, enrolls 324 veterans, and nearby San Diego State has 1,127 vets. In the California State University system, being a non-California resident costs nearly double the tuition, to the tune of more than $4,000 per year. By forcing veterans who fought not just for one state or for their home state, but for the entire United States, to fit into the standard residency requirements, in many instances, we are forcing them to delay their education or vocational training, that which they need for career advancement. And instead of making it more difficult to use their earned GI Bill benefits, we should be making it easier and more financially feasible. A recent national investigation called Back Home, the Enduring Falls Facing Post-9/11 Vets, noted the example of Marine Corps Corporal veteran Brian Aller, a student at UC San Diego's Scripps Institution of Oceanography, who is paying out of pocket to cover part of the $22,000 tuition, which his GI benefits don't fully pay. 15,000 veterans are discharged in the San Diego region each year, and about half decide to stay in the area to restart their civilian lives. Many of them are not from California, but they should have access immediately to the in-state tuition rate. Giving veterans the in-state tuition rate is a bipartisan idea that I know our chairman, Mr. Miller, supports. The House passed a bill 390 to 0 to provide this benefit. The comprehensive Senate bill I want us to vote on also includes that language. Mr. Speaker, I hope we can pass the Veterans Access to Care Through Choice, Accountability, and Transparency Act in its entirety and provide the necessary relief and support to our veterans and show the American people that Congress is capable of passing comprehensive reforms to what is clearly a broken system. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this motion to instruct. Let's actually get the needed reforms in place and expand educational opportunities and our support for our veterans. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the motion to instruct and yield myself such time as I might consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as I said during debate last week on other motions to reconstruct that were brought to our floor, improving timely access to quality health care and imposing true accountability for senior managers are the keys to beginning the long process of restoring trust at the Department of Veterans Affairs. This was the central charge to the conferees that are currently meeting at the beginning of our conference, and it remains the same charge tonight. As I said last week, now's not the time to tie the hands of the conferees with an unnecessary motion on the floor. Now, I know my colleague, Mr. Peters, has the best of intentions. They're rooted in his desire to serve veterans of this country, but unfortunately, somebody somewhere has different ideas. Veterans expect us to do what's best to improve the quality of care that they receive and the delivery of the benefits that they've earned. And I certainly expect that none of these votes that have been taken, in fact, I believe we've done 4, and another was noticed today, will be used by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in 30-second political ads. By adopting the motion to instruct, we'd be telling our conferees to recede to the Senate position on all provisions of the Senate bill. Now, while I'm still hopeful that a deal is possible, Senator Sanders and I and our staffs and other conferees continue to work each day and into the night. It's becoming more difficult, though, because the Senate has once again changed the goalposts, and I don't know what the Senate's real position is today. In fact, I said last week, I don't know if the Senate could vote for their own bill now. Now, Senator Sanders has recently indicated his desire to expand the scope of our conference committee's work. Expand it by adding VA's request, and I say request in quotes because I really don't know, is it an emergency request, is it a special request? Nobody seems to be sure exactly what it is. Most importantly, VA doesn't know what it is. But Senator Sanders is asking for the inclusion of an additional $17.6 billion into our conversation. Now, as I said last week, both the VA Office of Inspector General and the General Accounting Office have said on numerous occasions that they do not have any confidence in the numbers that VA provides right now. Moreover, at every budget hearing before our committee in recent years, the Secretary has sat at the witness table and clearly said when asked by members, do you have the funds necessary? The Secretary says we have the funds necessary to meet the needs of our veterans. So why all of a sudden would we believe that VA sees this need for an additional $10 billion to hire 10,000 more health care staff and $6 billion in new construction without thoroughly vetting the numbers? Oh yeah, add an additional $1.5 billion for IT, when we already know that VA has squandered hundreds of millions of dollars in IT money over the years. What I want to do for the members here tonight is to show you what a typical budget submission, a request from the administration on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs, over 1,300 pages in 4 volumes to justify the money that is spent at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Speaker, here's the explanation that was given to us for the $17.6 billion ask by the Department, and I have in recent days called it a 3-page document. $17.6 billion justified by a 3-page document. But actually, if you take the cover letter off, you take the closing page off, you have 1 page to justify $17.6 billion. Now, in talking with Senator Sanders and the Acting Secretary Sloan Gibson on the phone a couple of days ago, I expressed that this was not the way to justify this type of expenditure to this Congress. I believe people on both sides of the aisle will clearly admit that this is not what we would call regular order. But the Acting Secretary said by noon yesterday I would receive much more detailed information on this ask. So noon came and rolled by, and it was at 9 o'clock last night when finally we got this deep dive, additional information, and they doubled the pages. 2 pages of information for a $17.6 billion ask. 2 pages. The Acting Secretary will be before our committee tomorrow morning. I hope he brings 3 pages with him to justify this request. This is not enough information for such a huge ask by VA. It's not some unsubstantiated guess put together in the back room of a massive bureaucracy. In fact, interestingly enough, it's titled a working estimate as of July 22nd. This isn't even the number that they're sure that they want to ask for. Mr. Speaker, what's really disappointing is that I actually believe that we could have already come to an agreement if Senator Sanders had not insisted on moving the goalposts and adding this $17.6 billion ask into a clearly defined conference committee. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no further speakers and prepare to close.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, the House has almost a dozen bills that sit languishing in the Senate right now, including the authorization of 27 VA clinics passed in December, important changes to the processing of disability claims that has been so backlogged over the last few years, education benefits, including the in-state tuition bill that passed unanimously out of this House that has sat languishing with the other 11 bills in the Senate, waiting to be brought up for a vote. The Senate could pass these bills, send them straight to the President, and they would become law right away. Again, to my colleague from California, I'd remind you that H.R. 357, the GI Bill Tuition Fairness Act, did pass this House unanimously, and you were a co-sponsor of the bill that passed by 390 to 0 in February. It gives states the incentive to provide all veterans in-state tuition rates. It is very similar to the provision in the Senate bill that Mr. Peters wants our conferees to recede to in conference. So once again, this bipartisan bill could be sent to the President if the Senate would just bring it up for a vote. Mr. Speaker, we are trying to work out a deal with the Senate, but I submit to these body today that these motions to instruct are clearly becoming unproductive, are slowing down our process, and unfortunately, I think they are being used as nothing more than a political ploy. I find it very interesting that not one member of the minority side on our VA committee has offered over the last 4 times a motion to instruct conferees. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the motion to instruct and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman, California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I lament the notion that this is motivated entirely by politics, although I understand that would not be entirely unusual in this body. It was 80 degrees in San Diego today, and a beautiful day. I don't fly all the way over here to the 91-degree heat that feels like 100 not to do something, and veterans are a top priority for me. And the point of this motion is that we have something right before us that would deal with the culture of complacency that's failed our veterans. And we could pass the bill, supported both by Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator John McCain, which was passed by a vote of 93-3. I don't think you could get much more bipartisan than that. And would not raise the issues that Chairman Miller has discussed, because if we wanted to add more money, as Senator Sanders may want, we could take that up later. But there are very, very many points of agreement in the Senate bill that if we pass the Senate bill, would incorporate many of the things we did here in the House, if we pass it just like this. So it makes all the sense in the world to go ahead and have that bill before us so that we could pass it. It could be on the President's desk tomorrow. And at least many of the points of agreement, like the in-state tuition, for example, would be on their way to helping veterans right away. Last week I attended part of the stand-down for homeless veterans in San Diego. The Veterans Village of San Diego organized the first stand-down in 1988, and there are more than 200 similar programs nationwide that help provide a hand-up, not a handout, for homeless vets. No one at the event asked me whether I thought the House or the Senate or the President had the best plan for keeping our promise to America's veterans. They want action, and they want it now. And they don't want to hear about how the procedural rules of this place are some way to hide behind our lack of action. They fought for our country in the jungles of Vietnam and the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan. And the fact that this House can't put aside partisan politics to do the right thing for our veterans, is even more messed up than anyone could imagine. And yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, surely the gentleman did not insinuate that I, as the chairman of the most partisan committee in this Congress, was being partisan in anything that I've said or done.
Oh, absolutely not, Mr. Chairman. What I'm suggesting is the effect of our inability to vote on the Senate bill, which passed 93-3, sends the message that we just can't get it together.
Will the gentleman continue to yield?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that I do know one bill that is much more bipartisan than the Senate's 93-3 vote, and that was the House's bill that passed 430-0. Right.
And Mr. Miller, I could not argue with you. The only point I'd make is that those provisions of those bills, that bill is contained within the Senate bill that I hope we're able to vote on. That's why we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And frankly, if we can't get this kind of thing done, it's no wonder that the approval rate of the body is at 9%, and it's a shame. So I do urge my colleagues to adopt the motion to instruct so that we can get this effort moving and provide our veterans with the educational opportunities that they deserve, and with the support they deserve, and with the opportunity that they deserve, because they fought so hard and so bravely for us. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the